All right, hi, I'm Reese, and I'm going to start us out with the presentation. So this week's topic was reentry. Like I said, I'm Reese, and then we've got Delaney and Brooklyn who will come after. Not in that order, though. So our kind of focus for the week was rights restoration. So our three topics were: what is rights restoration? What are some of the barriers faced by people seeking to restore their rights, and provide some real-world examples. So I'm going to start us out with just talking about what exactly rights restoration is. So first, we need to define what reentry is to kind of understand, because rights restoration is a huge part of reentry. So reentry is the process of the reintegration of formerly incarcerated people back into society. And then, so the actual definition of rights restoration is the process of regaining civil rights following a conviction in which those rights were lost or taken away. So as most everybody probably already knows, that a felon, anybody convicted of a felony or anybody convicted, tends to lose most of their rights, including like the right to vote, that sort of thing. So I'm gonna kind of focus, well, not focus. I'm just gonna kind of introduce like some of the rights that if you're convicted of felony, what rights you lose in North Carolina. And so you lose your civil rights, so your right to vote, your right to hold public office, and your right to serve on a jury. The interesting thing is that all of these rights are restored upon what is called an unconditional discharge. So if you're not on parole, like that sort of thing, if you're just like completely separated from your sentence, from your conviction, and then you also lose the right to possess a firearm. Um, then the website that I found says state residents with minor nonviolent records may petition the court where they reside for restoration of firearms rights 20 years after completion of sentence. This website was it summarizes each of like the rights and how to like restore your rights for each state in the United States. I think it's called the Restoration of Rights Project, which I'm going to go into next. So this launched in August of 2017. Like I said, it contains a detailed state-by-state analyses of the law and practice in each U.S. jurisdiction relating to the restoration of rights and status following arrest or conviction. So it has a lot of comparison charts that track like patterns of restoration laws and policies nationwide to kind of know like what states are better for rights restoration. And this is just really important because, as this next quote says, these reference materials are intended as a resource for practitioners in all phases of the criminal justice system, for courts, for civil practitioners assisting clients whose court-imposed sentence has exposed them to additional civil penalties, for policymakers and advocates interested in reentry and reintegration of convicted persons, and for the millions of Americans with a criminal record who are seeking to put their past behind them. So essentially, this is a huge part of rights restoration and reentry. This project is because they've just compiled all this information in one place, and that's really important because a lot of the times information like concerning like where to find an attorney and like what like all of those sorts of things in the criminal justice system can sometimes be a little bit concealed. So this project is really good about just like bringing it all out into the open and letting like convicts know kind of like what their, I feel like convicts is not the right term, but I'll use it. Like convicts know like kind of what their rights are, or what rights they, or how they can gain their original rights back. But it's also really good for just like the like attorneys and all these different like inner workings of the criminal justice system to kind of know like how exactly they can work to restore those rights. Next, we'll move on to Brooklyn, who is going to cover what are the barriers.
Hi guys, I'm Brooklyn and I'm going to be focusing on what are the barriers of the reentry process. So with that being said, there are 6 primary barriers to this entire process. The first is going to be labels, and then that goes into neighborhoods, employment, housing, denial of public assistance, and inadequate reentry programs. So first, starting with labels, obviously these labels are ex-convict and felon. We would call these the mark of the criminal record. These labels can affect relationships with friends and families. Typically, these relationships will go downhill after somebody has been in prison and are released. due to a number of things. Primarily, it's going to be just a lack of resources, um, and mental health. It can go in a long list of why this can affect their relationships with friends and family. David Pager also talked about how labeling affects not only the ability they have for employment and housing, but it can also cause institutional trauma just because of the effects that they experience while in prison. It can affect them when they come out of prison. And by putting this label on them, that affects their mental health even more. It also affects how other people see them, and it causes more of a trauma with this institution. Next, we're going to talk about neighborhoods. So typically, an ex-convict is going to be released within the same neighborhood they were arrested from or where they were living prior to prison. Typically, these places are faced with economic disadvantages and often many criminal activities. And when these convicts are placed back into those neighborhoods, not only are they put in a difficult situation by putting in the same um, issues that they were having prior to being arrested and being around more of those people that may have caused them to be arrested, but they also lack resources that can give them the success they need. Employment is probably one of the larger barriers that is within the reentry process. As I stated prior to, just the label of ex-convict often deters employers from hiring someone who has been released from prison. Prison has also given them a lack of work experience. However long they were in prison, they were not able to work unless they were in a program that allowed them to develop those job opportunities within prison. And there are also very few opportunities open to them. They often have little pay and benefits for the jobs they are able to find. I actually found a website that I put in the works cited. It showed just all the jobs and opportunities that were available to them. And I just scrolled through it, and there really were not a lot. And they had very little benefits and very little pay. Another really big thing is housing. Typically, these people have to rely on their friends and family, but they're also typically not allowed to live with someone who has a criminal record. A lot of the times, when someone is released from prison and they need to find housing, the people they are closest with may have been in prison prior to, and they may not be able to live with them due to their criminal record as well. A lot of public housing is also off limits to them due to the label of ex-convict. On those lines as well, landlords can refuse tenancy due to the criminal record. And we also have the denial of public assistance. So this goes along with employment, housing, food stamps, and so much more. Convicts are typically released with very little funds and assets, so public assistance is very necessary for them to get on their feet, start their life back up again. But due to their criminal record, they can be refused for this process as well. And finally, we have very inadequate reentry programs. As I've stated before, the labels that are put on them, the neighborhoods they're released into, lack of housing, lack of employment, this all goes into these reentry programs. Now, there are programs for them. There's drug programs, which, if they were addicted to drugs previously, these drug treatment programs can help them get through that. There's therapeutic programs, which kind of secludes them from the rest of the prison. And then there's also cognitive behavioral programs, which allows them to get a hold of that thought process that brought them into that situation, and it kind of allows them to reverse that. There's also educational and vocational training programs, which just allows those who are in prison to get a higher education and to also develop a work experience while they're in prison, just so they can be more prepared to succeed when they are released from prison. Those are actually very good programs. However, they are typically very expensive, so very few programs have them, or very few prisons have them. which makes it more difficult for convicts to have this success when they exit prison. Convicts are also not, quote unquote, prepared for the outside world. They're also not taught how to rebuild those relationships with their family and friends. And that's another reason why the relationships with those people suffer so badly, because these reentry programs don't focus on their success when they leave. They more focus on getting them out into the world. That is why it is so important for them to focus on how they can help them to succeed rather than just simply focusing on incapacitation while in the prison rather than the reentry itself. Thank you.
All right, and so my name is Delaney, and I'm going to be talking about the real world examples of reentry programs and rights restoration. So I want to start off with local examples of reentry. North Carolina has 17 local reentry councils that serve individuals in 19 counties. This is through an agreement with the NCDAC. And so each local reentry council has an intermediary agency that provides managerial oversight, administrative support, fiscal accountability, and coordination of services. Um, what I really want to highlight in this presentation are those services, which I will touch more on in the next slide. But there is a very clear established need for these reentry programs. In 2022, there was a report by the NC Sentencing and Policy Advisory Commission that found a 49% recidivist arrest rate within 2 years from a sample of over 16,000 individuals released from prison in 2019. They took that same sample and found a 20% recidivist conviction rate and a 36% recidivist incarceration rate within 2 years of release from prison. And so if we compare these statistics from ones that we've encountered in class, this unfortunately isn't that shocking. On a more hyper local level of a positive impact of these reentry programs is seen with Kitendo Smith. He was formerly incarcerated at Scotland Correctional Institution. And he is actually now an employee at NC State University and has his own housing. He said that every time he comes home, he would just do the same thing over and over again before he had a reentry program to assist him. But with that assistance, the cycle stopped, and he says that he is doing right now and he is doing well. And that being said, not every person's case or experience with local reentry councils is going to be like Katendo's. People have to be willing to put in the work, but also at the same time, if a local reentry council isn't receiving the right funding or assistance, or they might be understaffed, they might miss the mark on fully assisting their community. So Wake County, it's going well for them, as I can see from my research. But yeah, it's not all just cut and dry. If someone gets involved with the reentry program, that everything's going to work out perfectly like it did for Kitendo. But back to Wake County specifically. On the right, I have screenshots of pictures from the Wake County LRC's website. Bottom right, an offender sews high quality luggage at the Mountain View sewing facility. So through this experience, he's not only having the opportunity for income, but he's also getting hard concrete skills that he can apply to other potential work opportunities. And so now a real life example of rights restoration. There's the case of CSI versus Moore. This actually happened right here in Raleigh in 2023. So this case was a challenge to North Carolina's felony disenfranchisement law, which bars people from voting if they are incarcerated and if they are on some form of supervision over a felony conviction. Last year in 2023, Superior Court in Wake County issued a landmark ruling in favor of the plaintiffs of this case, effectively restoring the right to vote of 56,000 people in the run-up to the 2022 midterms. And so that was actually in 2023. And so essentially what this case specifically was that after those 56,000 people had those rights restored. This case was trying to rescind those votes and make it so that people that were under that supervision over a felony conviction would lose that right again. And so an attorney involved with the case representing the plaintiffs, Daryl Atkinson, he stated that basically what's undergirding opposing counsel's arguments is that people convicted of felonies, you can do any manner of things to them to discriminate against them, and it wouldn't violate the Constitution, he said. Your Honor, when he was talking to the judge, that can't be the way. And so this is just an example of some of the difficulties that formerly incarcerated individuals will face when they are re-entering society. Once they leave the doors of the prison, life will not resume as it once was. And so through the efforts of, going through a reentry program assistance, at least one that is done right, they are on the path to at least try and live a more normal life. But yeah, those were some of the real life examples of reentry programs and rights restoration. And these are our sources.